Would it surprise you to know that doctors get about a week of nutrition education in all their 4 years of med school? Well, in this week's episode of Hunger Hunt Feast, I talked to Jay Gulinello, who works in a New York hospital offering nutritional counseling to the staff, to the doctors and nurses who work there. And we talk about how our flawed nutrition guidelines and the poorly done studies that support them manage to stay in the mainstream. So check it out. Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. With me is Jay Gulinello. Jay is a nutritional therapy practitioner and a master studying right now, finishing up his master's in clinical nutrition. Jay, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jay and I have connected on Instagram. He posts a lot of great stuff. I will definitely include that in the show notes, and we'll talk about it at the end of how you can reach out to him. But he posts a lot of great information, a lot of studies as well regarding nutrition. And we've just bantered back and forth several times. And I want to have him on. He's in a very unique position with his job currently. Why don't I'll let you explain that, Jay. What is it you're doing currently at the hospital?
Right. So I work at a New York City hospital, and my position is really kind of unique. So I don't actually see patients. All of my clients are actually doctors and nurses at the hospital, actually any employee at the hospital. So quite often I can be sitting in an office and I could have a brain surgeon one moment and then somebody who works in parking the next moment. So what's really interesting is that I was hired to sort of look after the health of the people who look after everybody else's health. And so I thought that was a really unique position and I was really excited about it. And, in the nutrition, holistic health space, I was also sort of warned about getting into this world because very often it's seen as a conflict between like the allopathic medical community and the sort of, homeopathic medical community. And never the two shall meet. But I don't know. I looked at it as an opportunity to bridge that gap, to bring a lot of different knowledge to the table, but also to learn from, what happens here at the hospital. So it's been an incredibly eye-opening experience. I've been here for about a year and a half. And every day is different. Every day brings different challenges. And I'm trying to bring some of my insight here and also understand a little bit about what doctors know, what doctors don't know, where their gaps in knowledge are and where I can fill them. And again, also I get so much valuable information on a daily basis from some of these people who have studied for years, in some case decades, their craft. So it's quite a unique position and I'm pretty happy to be here.
Sure, I would imagine so. You get quite a gap there, or I should say a span of knowledge from biochemistry to probably no knowledge at all, right. with all the employees. And there's definitely I think, well, I mean, you can speak to this on your own, but what would you say is their knowledge of what you would consider healthy nutrition?
That is a great question. And actually it's a question I get asked a lot because I really try to straddle the line because, a lot of people will just blast one community or the other, right? Either one is right and therefore the other one is wrong. And I try not to look at anything in those simplistic black and white terms. So I would say that it's surprising how much they don't know in terms of actual prevention. So preventative medicine is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but I don't see a lot of that maybe diagnostically, but I don't see a lot of that here at the hospital in terms of, I would say that Western medicine is great if you are in a car accident or for like acute trauma care. I don't think there's anywhere else in the world that I would rather be taken care of or literally put back together. But when it comes to understanding the body as a system, understanding how vitamins, minerals, nutrients, everything interact with the body. Unfortunately, there's a lot of specialization. So somebody who knows the kidneys maybe doesn't have as great a grasp on other systems. And you can't just simply, I think that's why people often end up on a lot of different medications, because a specialist knows that I need to bring this metabolic marker into a certain range. And to do that, I have to give this drug. And very often that may interact with something else. And so that's why you see sometimes people on multiple medications and having multiple doctors. So I would say that preventative care isn't their strength, true preventative care, in my opinion, because, and I may be biased, but I think nutrition is a huge element of preventative care. And when I talk to doctors on a daily basis, they get little to zero nutrition training in all of medical school, which is It's actually
Right.
kind of shocking, but they really don't get any. At least they didn't, before, and it's getting a little better, but it's still not nearly where it needs to be. A week of nutrition training is not nearly enough to truly be adept at preventative care.
A week out of 4 years and all the
Right. And if it's the
right.
first week, they're never going to remember it by the last week.
I wouldn't either.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right. So, but you're there to take care of their health, but I'm sure that's, of course, they're passing down what they know. But would you say what they know is based on the standard nutritional guidelines of that week was the food pyramid, right? It was a week of avoid red meat, here eat all your grains and lots of
Don't forget margarine.
Margarine, yeah, low fat. Let's have or fake fat.
Yeah.
And so that's what's being obviously fed to patients there, and they have to be in a line with it. So what you're telling them, I'm guessing, just knowing what you espouse, it is in direct conflict with what they're telling their patients and what they're feeding to their patients.
It's so true, and I think that's why I find this job so fascinating, because I'm constantly straddling this line between what I'm allowed to say, because I'm certainly allowed to practice the way I see fit, but I have to be very careful. It's like the Matrix analogy. You can't just red pill people all day long and tell people, saturated fat's not so bad for you, and they're like, what? Wait a minute, hold on a second. So and like you said before, depending on who it is that's in front of me, I have to tailor my knowledge. And ironically enough, the people that have less overall medical education are much more receptive to things than people who already have a perceived knowledge of nutrition, because they think if they've studied medicine, well, they automatically know nutrition, which clearly is not the case. They wouldn't have an entire master's program devoted or a PhD program devoted to nutrition if you could get all of that in medical school.
Right.
So that's really interesting, and it does fly in the face. And I think sometimes I have to bring people along slowly. So we try something, and I often say, try something for 2 weeks or a month, literally anything you try for a 30-day period, it's not going to be detrimental. You could eat Twinkies for 30 days and you would probably end up okay. So let's just try what I'm telling you, especially if you're having some kind of an issue that you're trying to deal with, whether that be pre-type 2 diabetes, or you'd be surprised at how many healthcare professionals also have, they're part of the statistic of chronic disease. I know, I think we both posted about the 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy.
Right.
And they're not doctors and nurses. People have to realize they're just people too. They're part of the statistic. So it's not they're not anything special in terms of they're still human. So they still have the same biology, and they're still susceptible to all the same things. So it's really important for them to understand that. And that's that's that line that I walk every day. But it's rewarding when people look at me and they say, oh, I didn't really know that, or I hadn't considered looking at it from that perspective, which is, again, exactly why I'm here.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say are the typical issues that they're coming to you with? Is it mostly like weight loss, or are they getting blood work and saying, hey, how do I fix this? Or
I just had a conversation about that this morning, actually. I think weight loss is probably the biggest one, at least at first, because it's the most recognizable. People know when they've gained a few pounds and that they want to lose. Blood work, if I often ask for blood work, if somebody can bring me either blood work from a primary care, or one of my proudest moments so far has been instituting a biomarker program here, and I chose 5 biomarkers that were the signature of metabolic syndrome. So for the first time ever, we've got doctors and nurses here getting their insulin checked, which is, I've often said this is the hill I'm going to die on, that people need to know their insulin number, because hyperinsulinemia is at the root of most chronic disease.
Where it starts.
Right. And nobody knows the number. If you go on the street, I guarantee you 9 out of 10 people will have never had their insulin checked. So that's a very eye-opening thing. So you might have a lean, young, cross-fitting nurse who their doctor says, well, you don't need to get your insulin checked. Your blood sugar, your fasting blood sugar is totally normal. And I'll say, look, let's just get it checked anyway. And then lo and behold, you get it back and it's slightly elevated, because they've been sort of doing the pounding the carbs, because they think they need to have a high carbohydrate diet in order to perform. And they need, or they're eating, like you said, the sort of the food pyramid, the food guidelines, which are inherently higher in carbohydrate. And if their body's not capable of handling that, even how active they are, they could have an elevated insulin level, and that could be the harbinger of disease to come decades down the road. So I want to catch things, again, going back to the preventative side. I want to really catch things as early as I possibly can. And so that's a real life example, actually, of someone that I had whose doctor didn't think it was necessary. We got the number anyway, and then found out that it was elevated. And now we can now we have data to move forward. And so that's why I helped create this program to get all of these metabolic markers for almost any client who wants it. So we can start looking at that and have a baseline, and we can look at trajectory going forward. Even if there's no metabolic disease right now, we can keep that, we can keep track of that going forward.
Sure. So why don't you unpack for the listeners the difference between a blood insulin level and their blood glucose level? A lot of people think A1C, blood glucose, they're not quite connected, because a lot of, like you said, a lot of people have never had it tested. A lot of doctors haven't had it tested. They're not familiar with a blood insulin test, or even what that range is supposed to look like, and what's healthy and what isn't.
So really the simplest way, I think, to explain it is your fasting blood sugar is highly variable. That's when you get a blood panel back, it'll usually just say, glucose. So I never try to take any one number in isolation, but the blood glucose number I look at it as only one side of the equation. So the pancreas secretes insulin to help bring blood sugar levels down into that normal range, because blood sugar at too high a level is toxic. So the pancreas has to put out insulin in order to help control blood sugar. So you may have a normal blood sugar, but what if, again, the other side of that equation, what if the pancreas is doing an obscene amount of work and putting out a whole truckload of insulin in order to control that blood glucose level? We don't want to see that. And so by never checking that, if you wait too long until a blood glucose level is out of control, like in the triple digits, I've had people come in and say, well, my doctor said not to worry because my blood sugar was, only 110 or only 115 or only 120 of fasting blood sugar. And I can't remember off the top of my head, I think 126, I think, is the range for pre-diabetes, but you can, someone will fact check me. But insulin then becomes extremely important, because in checking the insulin levels, you can see, again, before that blood sugar level is testing out of range, you can see how much work the pancreas is doing. And so that's why I think it's just super, super important. And I like to see levels, I want to say under 5 is really where I like to see them. And that's a little bit aggressive, because I think I was looking the other day, the level on the test, they say anything I think under 12 is acceptable. But I think once you start to get into the double digits, you're starting to look at maybe some issues. And a lot of times when I see an elevated insulin level, I also see elevated triglycerides, and I also see a lower HDL. And so those things tend to all come together. So an
insulin resistant environment in general.
Exactly. You're creating the beginnings of that metabolic dysfunction. So I really do like to get that insulin, even if it's totally normal and someone's at like a 4 or a 3. That's great. So now we know, and then we don't have to get it tested every 6 months. But if you go once a year to get your blood work done, it can't hurt to have that. And then the trajectory of what your lifestyle and your diet are doing to your physiology.
Right. It goes up to what, like 20? Is that correct? The range of the test?
I think so. Yeah. And but I've actually seen I've seen some values even higher than that.
Wow.
Which is
right above 20. Maybe that's what I was thinking. Above 20 is kind of danger zone.
We could, I can send you the actual ranges. I'd be happy to. In fact, I think it would be great for people to see those ranges, because I think it's important to have that, just that base, just to understand. But yeah, it's
right.
It's surprising. Yeah. It's surprising when people get that number back sometimes.
Yeah. So that number tends to remain more constant all the time than, say, obviously a blood glucose can be up and down from like getting up in the morning till middle afternoon when you sort of have that lull. That alone can cause increases in blood sugar, but so the insulin level tends to be fairly steady.
Yes. So it is pulsatile in nature. So there is a little bit of variability, but compared to blood glucose, I would consider it incredibly solid, incredibly stable. I mean, that's a great point. Which is exactly why I never take one value all by itself. So if you have a rough commute to work, or you almost get in a car accident, or you're stepping out of the elevator at the doctor's office and somebody literally frightens you, and within a few minutes you're getting your blood drawn, your blood glucose levels could be higher. Or if you exercise in the morning and go to your, I know the test is supposed to be fasted, but I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to work out. Well, that's liberating that's liberating glycogen, and
A
that's
lot of,
liberating glucose into the blood in order to work out. And so you could test higher. So that's why if I get somebody's level that's elevated, but it doesn't make sense with the rest of their lifestyle and their other metabolic markers, often either I'll have it retested or I'll make sure I get an insulin just to make sure that nothing untoward is happening.
Gotcha. Smart. Well, that's great. Yeah. Like you said, a lot of people don't even know, but if doctors and nurses don't know, then the public in general, they're not going to be told to know that they need to check it.
The irony is a lot of people with diabetes will have their insulin checked, but it's only until they've been diagnosed with diabetes that they'll start checking their insulin, which is
they're in a disease state. Yeah.
Yes, it's decades too late.
Yeah. And reversing it, I mean, forget the medical community thinking about reversing it. They just medicate it. I know a few practitioners like Jason Fung, or there's a low carb San Diego. They're reversing diabetes, helping people lose weight, with fasting and keto diets and so forth, and very effective with it, and getting them off their meds in 6 weeks. Sometimes 6 or 8 weeks. It's amazing, and non-medicated therapy, through lifestyle.
I think at Low Carb USA was the first time I was introduced to Dr. Sarah Hallberg.
Yeah.
She's one of the doctors out at the Verda Health Clinic that's doing human clinical trials with type 2 diabetes and showing amazing long-term, long-lasting results with diet and lifestyle. And I think that is such a profound testament to the power of nutrition, which is why I study it, which is why I think it's the simplest intervention and comes with the least side effects.
Right. Yeah. She's the one that said, that TED talk is ignore the guidelines. I mean, here's just a famous TED talk. She said, ignore the the food pyramid, the plate, whatever they call it, ignore them, because they're going to take you in the wrong direction. So I think we've got that kind of takes us right into, what general health authorities, nutrition authorities, even, I know you're studying nutrition, but I would think a lot of what is in a standard nutrition education curriculum is contrary to what you're saying. I know you're personally studying like an ancestral approach, but that is not standard nutrition education. I mean, standard nutrition education is in line with the food pyramid and what the doctors believe they know. It's just on an expanded level.
Yeah.
So how is that working with your education? I mean, are you being taught, is your curriculum based on the standard guidelines?
So this is so interesting. Actually, I'm really lucky to have stumbled upon the University of Bridgeport because they take nutrition from a functional medical perspective. In fact, most of my classes actually have 2 textbooks. I always joke about, I joke about my pathophysiology class. I had 2 textbooks. I had a Western medicine textbook, so I studied medicine and disease and the processes the way a Western medical doctor would study it. And then I had another textbook that was from a functional medical perspective. So I would study the same disease state, the same pathologies, but from 2 totally different angles, which makes double the work.
Right.
But it's really actually fascinating to understand both approaches. And actually, we've been told several times that Yale Medical College has approached the University of Bridgeport to help develop a curriculum for the students to study nutrition, because the medical students understand now that they need that understanding to be effective medical doctors. And long story short, every time it gets flown up the flagpole, at one point or another, it gets the kibosh put on it, which, there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, we have to understand that the pharmaceutical influence in medical colleges is incredibly powerful. And so I'm sure there's a little bit of everything at play. There's a lot of money at play. There's politics at play. But what's sad about it is that it hasn't happened yet. But what's encouraging about it is that the medical students are demanding it. And I think it's only a matter of time before they do get that, which I've been rooting for. And I think it's fantastic that they understand the need for that.
Oh yeah. So you're learning both functional and allopathic approaches?
Right. Yep.
So you're not held to one side or the other as far as what you have to, because when you go to a test, it's like,
they're long.
Or your paper, it's like, which textbook am I going off of here for this exam?
Yeah. It's another great point. So with research papers, we have to present the data as it exists. So I'm pulling data from the CDC, from the World Health Organization, we're doing this sort of, and then we're always asked at some point in that research paper, you need to form your own thesis, form an opinion, and how you would approach this from a functional perspective, either using nutrients, vitamins, minerals, whole foods, whatever it is. So, I just had completed a research paper on GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and how it's treated with H2 receptor blockers or PPIs, and then how, an approach through some, herbs or just, just regular natural vitamins and minerals, how those two approaches vary. And so, it was a 15-page research paper because you really have to go in depth on both sides. So yeah, you do get both sides. And I think it's incredibly valuable to understand the approach, because it's a lot easier to counter that, or it's a lot easier to create a therapy that's an adjunct to that, if you understand what the traditional approach is.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. It'd make you easier, I would think, for you to work in an institutional environment and be able to present, your argument.
The terminology, using the terminology is
right. Same terminology, same knowledge, not just coming at it from a purely holistic, standpoint, but be able to understand how the research works as well. I'm sure you've noticed, I think we've talked about briefly, there's a lot of censorship in social media with regards to a progressive health message. It seems to be trying to tailor just towards which is really strange, but towards to me, it seems strange that we have censorship from social media companies on nutrition advice that is leaning towards the standard American, pyramid, Nutrition Academy being sponsored by PepsiCo, ConAgra, and General Mills, not exactly bastions of healthy food, because of their USDA contracts with schools and military, hospitals, as you're experiencing in the hospital. Yeah. So, I mean, what have you seen as regards to the censorship of, say, an alternative health message or more holistic health message? Have you seen that or experienced that?
Sure. Firsthand knowledge, and it is frightening. And I think that maybe people don't quite understand just how serious this could be. I mean, I use an example of censoring. I mean, I'm against censorship in any form, but I have an example of a client who is a pre-type 2 diabetic, and I was trying to alter their breakfast, starting with one meal, because they were eating what essentially amounted to a very high sugar, low fat breakfast. It was bananas and toast and cereals and oatmeals and, all of these things that are very high sugar, very low protein, very low fat. And his physiology at this point is starting to catch up with, is starting to catch up with that sort of diet. And so we're trying to make that adjustment. And because but his wife does all the cooking, and she is petrified of cholesterol and of fat. And so he came to me recently and said, I can't change my breakfast because my wife she says, if I cook this for you, I'm going to give you a heart attack and you're going to die. And that really, that really drove the message home for me, is that, people don't know what they don't know. And it's not their job to know, they have other things they do with their life, and they rely on what they perceive as unfiltered information, whether it's coming from a newspaper, from a television news program, right, from a headline, and or a doctor or anybody. They expect unfiltered information and true health, unbiased health information. And unfortunately, what I see is that they're not getting that. And so for people to say, oh, censorship is, just a conspiracy theory, or what difference does it really make in the real world? Well, that's an example in the real world of how that could, if I'm not able to get through to this person, and I have to proceed very slowly because I can't discredit his wife, you see, so right, there's it's a really tough position to be put in, because I have to essentially pit him against his wife, which of course I would never do. I just have to try to educate him and therefore help educate her. And, and I'm not above pulling her into a session, like a group therapy. Let's all talk about why fat is not so bad. But if that's what I have to do, then that's what I'll do. But this is a very real world version of how censorship and information being censored can directly impact the health of an individual. And, in terms of the year we're talking, in 2020, I know a doctor personally who was having great success at the beginning of this whole sort of viral outbreak. And he had a YouTube channel, and he's a medical doctor, and he had a YouTube channel. And I think some of the titles on his videos were things like, "There is hope." right?
Hmm.
This is not a message that you would think is, you know,
Right.
is something that we would want to censor. There is hope. That doesn't sound so bad to, you know, to anybody. But because he was utilizing things that were outside the norm, which I also find interesting, because in a hypothetical situation, if you have a completely novel disease, you would
Hmm.
think in any other line of work, you would say, okay, all hands on deck. I want every professional in this field to give their input because we don't know what's going on here and we want to get all the information we possibly can. But the exact opposite happened. There was sort of a clamping down on information. And so this doctor, who actually had a story about somebody who was told to just stay at home and wait for symptoms to progress, and you know, that sort of was the narrative. And this gentleman actually thought he was going to die. It was not hyperbole. He said, I was having trouble breathing. I thought I was going to die. He saw a video, was sent to him from this doctor. He decided that he was only a few hours away in the same state, so he drove to the clinic. They were able to treat him. And within about 4 or 5 days, he said, I finally was able to start breathing again, and he fully recovered. Now, had that video not been online,
Hmm.
I don't know what would have happened. I can't say that the patient would have died, but he certainly thought he was trending in that direction. And so that's just another example of how information being filtered at the source means you have a whole bunch of people walking around thinking that they are fully informed about a certain situation, any situation.
Right.
But if they don't even know the information is being censored, then they are armed with lack of knowledge, and they're running around telling people that they, you know, they know what's happening. But the truth is they haven't even seen all of the information being censored behind the scenes. So I am a true advocate for, you know, anti-censorship. I don't think it in any form, I don't think it helps anybody. I think it's one of the worst things we've experienced, and I think it's only accelerated in 2020. And censorship does not retreat. It only advances. It only gets worse. Started off with, you know, the plant-based movement, and seeing some things censored about, you know, those plant-based meats having a high soy content. I saw a lot of that censorship happening. I thought that's kind of strange. But then it's turned into other kinds of censorship that are really, really troubling me, and they're directly impacting people's lives at this point.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. I think Rob Wolf, who's pretty well established, I think, in just, you know,
You could say that.
paleo method, you know, it's you know, he's an icon in a sense for progressive health, as far as certainly a huge influencer. But he has expressed, you know, he's felt that censorship of his posts, of his platforms, and there's nothing dangerous about getting people to eat whole food. You know what I mean?
Depends on who you talk to.
I mean, you know, whole food. It's like, okay, it's like that's paleo could be basically something, you know, whole food to some degree with some restrictions, but it's pretty much whole food. And it's kind of silly that is being, you know, to say that you be healthier is somehow practicing medicine by eating, you know, prevention. Basically, just preaching prevention is somehow dangerous.
I mean, I'm 100% with you. And I think that term, and I've had that term used against me several times by posting scientifically valid research, people saying that's dangerous. And my reply is always, you know, listen, you can scroll right on by. You do not, no one is forcing you to read this. But I'll tell you the truth is, it's the opposite. Lack of information is dangerous.
Right.
There is no such thing as dangerous information. That is purely that is a viewpoint on information. But I've never seen any evidence that any information is dangerous. You can take it or leave it. You can do what you want. You can believe what you want. If you have an echo chamber that you are happy to exist in, I really do keep an open mind, and I try very hard to fight against biases. And I tell people all the time, though, on my tombstone, I want written, you know, here lies the person who tried to, you know, the term conspiracy theory. I want to bring that term back to meaning a positive thing, because to me, a conspiracy theorist, at least, is someone who is also a critical thinker, someone who dared to think outside the box. And I think now we have, and we see it clearly in 2020, where respectable doctors, Nobel laureates, Nobel Prize winning doctors are now being lumped into a sort of tinfoil hat conspiracy theory world if they just simply don't agree with the mainstream. And this is why I say that censorship only progresses. It does not retreat. So it's very dangerous to start labeling people. I find the term conspiracy theory to be intellectually lazy. I find it to be the mark of, again, someone who wants to walk around thinking that they're armed with knowledge, but really they're just sort of living in an echo chamber. And I think that is what's dangerous, because you
Yeah.
never consider any outside opinion. So I
Well,
would like to
it's
bring
lazy.
that term back. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Or a fringe movement, a fringe. It's the same idea. You know,
Yeah.
everything's
And, you know, I mean, where would we be without Galileo? You know, he was a fringe movement and probably a conspiracy theorist at the time, right?
yeah, I would say. I would
I
say,
mean,
and
spent
he
most of his life
felt
in
it.
prison.
I mean, the fringe movement, that's where knowledge comes from. I mean, at what point were they calling Elon Musk, you know, kind of wacky, you know, in his ideas, and, you know, with electric, you know, vehicle that goes, you know, 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. I mean, who, you know, our fringe movement, those are pioneers. Those are our people who are pushing the envelope, who are looking for something that works. They're
Yes.
not doing that to, they're looking for something that works better. And so with the censorship, we're actually, we're harboring progress. We're holding progress back.
Yeah.
And like you said, discussion, free thinking, and discussion among peers. And that's only the only place. I mean, if we leave everything to academia, where all knowledge is only locked into academia, we're lost. We're lost.
Right. No, you need the wisdom of crowds. You need to crowdsource information and wisdom. I mean,
Right.
there are so many amazingly intelligent people out there. And anytime you consolidate anything in that way, I think you start to lose perspective. And I think it's a very dangerous game to play. And I hope that people are seeing that. But again, when you have a mainstream sort of media outlets that just espouse the same talking points and the same thing over and over again, it's hard to even convince people that there is an alternative view out there. And so it's we're in a precarious situation for science, and you know, but true science is constantly questioning. I'm never afraid to be wrong. I love being wrong, because it means that I've now learned something. And I just think far too often people are afraid to be wrong. And I just really think you have to strip away that ego. I've been wrong so many times in my life, I've lost count now. But it's how I've ended up where I am, by being wrong.
Right. It's a move forward. It's a part of the path forward is allowing yourself to be wrong and learn something new, just as you said. So one of the biggest narratives being espoused out there by the mainstream is of course this plant-based diet, right? And you're taking an ancestral approach, so I can pretty much guess you're without despite the fact that we've discussed it before, but you know, that's obviously in direct conflict with an ancestral approach. And yet that's what we're hearing from like Harvard. We got Walter Willett, epidemiology, you know, as well as a lot of marketing, a lot of tech, big tech kind of pushing this agenda, which seems strange that they would be involved in that, but there's some investment there, obviously. And we've talked about these studies that come out with these headlines that kind of grab attention to try to wrap up a narrative in a headline. And then most people are not going to read the study. There was one you just posted in the last week about the effects of plant-based versus eating meat on coronary disease.
Right. Yeah, the headline, which is what drew me into reading it, and so that should show you that I have no bias, because I have a bias, but I work hard against it.
Sure.
The headline was "Replacing red meat with plant foods reduces coronary heart disease." So that was the headline. So now, if I'm a person who doesn't have an open mind, I would immediately poo-poo that and say, well, I eat red meat and that can't be true, so I'm not even going to bother reading it. But I was really interested, because this was from the British Medical Journal, and this was published just a few days ago. And so that headline made me, of course, want to look deeper into. And so in the first line, I saw Walter Willett was part of the study. Now, I happen to know Walter Willett's background and some of his conflicts of interest and his somewhat descriptive terms of animal products and red meat. So I automatically knew, okay, well, I have to at least consider this. And that's something that everybody should consider. But two other really interesting things. So this study was conducted from 1986 to 2016. And food frequency questionnaires were filled out every 4 years in that time period.
Every 4 years.
Every 4 years, yeah.
Ooh, so you got to look back 4 years to remember what you ate?
Yeah. Yep. And I often ask people, you know, do you remember even what you ate last Tuesday? Yeah. So that's a tough one. And if you've ever seen a food frequency questionnaire, they combine categories in places. Like there was one famous one that had pizza was in the category of red meat, because there may be red meat on pizza. But, you know, I mean, a pizza is made with quite a few other ingredients. So to lump red meat in with pizza is a little strange. So you have to consider the quality of the questionnaire, and then again, you have, like you said, you have to consider whether you're going to remember every 4 years how accurately your
Right.
diet recall is. So, but even if all of that was perfectly normal, and someone you had a human, a cyborg that could remember every single thing they ate every 4 years and jot it down in the most accurate way possible. This was buried in the study, which I thought was really interesting. And this is directly from the study. I'm going to quote the study here. Those with higher total red meat consumption were more likely to smoke, consume alcohol, have diabetes, and use aspirin. They had higher intakes of total energy and trans fatty acids, but were less physically active. They had lower intakes of multivitamins, fruits, and vegetables, and similar distributions were observed with processed and unprocessed red meat consumption. So essentially every possible lifestyle factor that would go against longevity, these people exhibited. And this is like a classic example of unhealthy user bias. If people are told red meat's bad for you, and so, yeah, I'm just going to eat red meat and I don't really care about my health, so I'm also going to smoke, I'm not going to exercise, I'm not going to eat fruits and vegetables, I'm not going to do any of that stuff.
I'm going to drink too much, stay up too late. Yeah.
Right. And so somehow, there was an egg study recently that did the same thing. Somehow they were able to pin red meat as the cause of the coronary heart disease in these people. And I just don't think it can get more disingenuous than that. That
Right.
is confounding variable to the nth degree. And but a headline, does not a study make. So if people are reading that headline, though, they are compelled to think, well, I need to go to plant foods. And I can't tell you how many people come to me watching a documentary or with a study like that, and they will say, well, I'm thinking about going plant-based. And I am, I have no dogma. I am not against plants. I mean, that would be kind of silly to be running around being angry at plants all day long. I don't have that sort of dogma, but I do have a dogma against bad science. And I would like to see more honest science. And if it pointed us in one direction, I would follow it. I used to tell people all the time, if eating cardboard was the key to living to 150, I would be eating cardboard and telling all my clients to eat cardboard. But there is there is no evidence for that. And these kinds of observational studies that can only show correlation, not causation, they shouldn't be used to weaponized essentially in that way against red meat. But as you said, this has been happening now for several years, and I'm concerned that censorship will start to creep into these areas, and that pretty soon, who's to say that if you want to publish a study on how healthy red meat is, that isn't considered dangerous information? Because if we say that red meat causes heart disease, then someone could say, well, you're literally killing people by telling them to eat red meat. I mean, we're not too far from that. You have to understand
not too far from that
where we
at all.
are in 2020.
No, I think that's happened already. I think there are studies that have been pushed and not published because they promoted a low carb diet. I mean, they're absolutely there.
Sure, the low carb. That's right. Yeah, in the low carb community, I have seen some of that. So I'm concerned. I'm genuinely concerned about science right now. I think a lot of it in this year specifically, we've seen it accelerated to a level that I study this, and I say it with not any kind of celebratory manner. I mean, I'm studying science, and yet I'm seeing it be sort of bastardized all the time, and it's troubling because I don't know what that means from the end of my science career. When I'm done with this, what kind of research will I be able to get into if it's all going to be sort of predetermined? Let's just say.
Right. Well, then the meat replacement of the meat, the Beyond Burgers and all that being, which I think is where big tech comes in and the drive of.
That's a great point.
Some level of investment there. There's a lot of technology involved in that, obviously, but there's also and big farm, big food manufacturers, because you look at the list of ingredients on those, it's a lot of grain, a lot of weird stuff. It's like it's stuff that you wouldn't. I mean, I like single ingredient foods, generally speaking, for the most part. Like if it's 80-90% of my diet, single ingredient. When I buy it, but those are 13, 14 ingredients to make something that mimics meat and has nowhere near the nutritional value.
Right. And mimics meat only in terms of maybe mouthfeel, taste, smell. I often see these articles written. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And they're written and they never talk about the micronutrient value. They never talk about any of because everyone assumes that red meat has no health benefits. that it's literally void of all health benefits. So therefore, all we have to do is create something that looks, smells, and tastes like it, and we'll be 100% fine. And that's another flaw in logic.
Right. It's discounted. Meat eating is discounted as because you like the taste.
Right.
Rather than the nutritional benefit. Oh, you just want protein. Well, I'm not a bodybuilder. It's like, what? Okay. So you don't have to be pounding metal, lifting iron to be, to need a decent amount of protein coming from animal sources. I mean, that's what we're made of. And I think, like, once again, you had another study that was talking about stearic acid and how our mitochondria just really respond well to that versus, say, polyunsaturated fats. I would assume would be the
absolutely
contrary.
Yeah. I mean, it quite literally upregulates beta oxidation, which is the mitochondria using fat as a fuel source. So again, if you want to make an argument against saturated fat, it has to be a different argument, because clearly our biology is built to sense and to utilize stearic acid, which is an 18 carbon saturated fat found in high amounts in animal products. It's also found in raw cacao, I believe, but its highest prevalence is in animal products. So that's just an amazing tale of how our biology works. And that's to approach things ancestrally also means to approach things biochemically. So I want to understand how that works inside the body, inside the cell, inside the mitochondria, and then I can determine whether I think this is a beneficial thing or a not beneficial thing. Polyunsaturated fatty acids tend to cause problems in the cell. They become part of the cell membrane and make them less robust. And so I look at that and say, okay, so maybe even though some polyunsaturated fats are essential, I don't think the percentage that we consume them now in our diet is ancestrally consistent, whereas saturated fats are just the opposite. So, but again, we're built on a faulty foundation. We have decades of science that told us one thing, but we never stopped to consider that, what if that was wrong? What if that information was just, maybe it was the best, and putting all conspiracy theories aside, what if it was just the best information at the time, but nobody can admit when they're wrong. So we never alter course, and we never do what's right for people. We just continue to try to beat the dead horse of animal products have to be bad. Therefore, we do the same thing with cholesterol. LDL must be bad. And so therefore anything that lowers it is healthy, which is why people will advocate for industrial seed oils, because they can lower LDL cholesterol, but they cause a whole bunch of other problems. So again, if you're built on a faulty foundation, you're never going to get where you're going.
Well, isn't the majority of the fat in a human body stearic, and a very small amount polyunsaturated, as far as from birth? Like we're talking about 2, 4, maybe 6% is polyunsaturated, and 80 to 90 stearic? Yeah.
And there was a great, I don't have it with me, but I'd be happy to send it to you. There was a great study done on the amount of linoleic acid, omega-6, that was consumed ancestrally as opposed to consumed today. And it was just really such a stark contrast. And you can even see sort of like the three main pillars of processed food would be refined sugar, refined wheat, carbohydrates, and vegetable, seed oils. And all of those came into the human diet in a matter of 90 years, right? Yeah. So you have all of human biology, all of human evolution, and then you have this short little time span, and basically in the last 100 years, all of these new products were introduced. And prior to that, we had no record of any kind of real chronic disease, and heart disease was virtually unknown before JAMA was the first to publish the first myocardial infarction in 1912. So prior to that, we didn't even have the medical literature on heart attacks. And now 32% of Americans die of heart attacks. Right. So, I mean, that's incredible. And you see the largest, the biggest change to the human diet has been those three things. And it all came about in an evolutionary blink of an eye in 90 years. Yeah. So again, that's not causation, that's correlation. But to me, it's a correlation that must be looked at. And we're looking everywhere but that. We're not looking at sugar. We're not looking at seed oils. We're still looking at saturated fat and animal fat as being the problem. But we consume 99% of our fats were animal fats prior to the invention of industrial seed oil. So it's amazing to me how even the logic to look in that direction is flawed. So I just think we need a reset in terms of how we approach nutrition.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of industry driving that narrative between the production of those seed oils, the oil manufacturers, beginning with the Crisco and Procter and Gamble, and then funding the national, the heart,
American Heart Association.
American Heart Association. And then it's not a conspiracy. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I mean, it was actually published in New York Times, and then I may have been Journal of American Medical, one of the medical journals, that the Sugar Foundation actually funded or paid Harvard researchers to write papers that vilified fat as a result of cardiovascular disease, and promoted and discredited any study that promoted sugar, that said sugar was a cause of heart disease. They actually discredited those from Harvard, from their seat at Harvard. And then one of those guys actually ended up on the board to create the food pyramid in 78.
Yeah, I think, and I want to say, and I know one of the names of the doctors that was paid off. And I want to say that one of the nutrition chair positions at Harvard is still named after him.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So I mean, again, I think this is part of, like, you have to consider the source, right? You really do have to understand where the information is coming from.
Yeah.
And it's really more business than it is conspiracy. It's just very simply, how do we increase the bottom line?
It's really simply greed. Yeah.
And I don't know why that's a foreign concept to some people. I mean,
right.
Greed it's been part of human existence probably since forever. I'm sure the cavemen were greedy of certain tribes. I mean, I'm sure. I mean,
right.
This is just a human. Maybe it might even be a preserved biological mechanism that helped us survival of the fittest. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm just guessing, but
right.
But I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. And these companies now, like you said, that can create food for us, right? If you create a lab food, what does that also makes you completely dependent on a company for your food. You no longer have food sovereignty. And that's one of my other big things. I try to get all of my clients to start consuming a certain percentage of their food from local farms, and we have, there's a lot in New York. I get a lot of mine from a local farm. I would say maybe 85 to 90% of my food from a local farm. Not only is it healthier, but it supports them. And when there was a meat shortage, and there was no meat on the shelf, I had no problems because I was getting my food from a real, actual farm. And so I just think that's incredibly important too, for people always ask me, well, what do we do about all this stuff? And, you can't necessarily change things from the top down, but you can change things from the bottom up, because you have, right now anyway, you have a lot of control over your own food sovereignty. So start by building those communities, start by getting food from local sources, because then it can't change. If you're literally going next door to buy your food, that will always be there as long as that farm is there. So I can't think of anything more important if people want a point of action. I think that's one of the most important things you can do.
And there's a big move in regenerative farming as well to change the way we raise our animals to not only be healthier, but just, more humane, if you want to call it that, but it's, and more environmentally sound. In other words, regenerating the soil. It's not just depleting the soil like our farming techniques do. And, it's actually putting carbon back into the soil. And Sacred Cow is a great, resource of that. I had Diana Rogers on a few weeks ago and unpack that. And it was, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. There's a huge, just like you just said, a grassroots movement. It's not going to start top down. It's going to start from consumers spending their money where they feel it's important, where it benefits the long-term, hope, goal, and feeds themselves better as well. So, and that the change has got to start, like you said, from the bottom up. And that's why the censorship is such a dangerous issue, because how we're communicating is through social media, connecting with each other, blogs, podcasts, and like hers was a self-funded or crowdfunded, self-produced documentary.
Yeah.
And, there's no big money behind that. She raised some money. She filmed some of it. She raised some more money. She filmed a little more of it, produced it, directed herself. And she's just a nutritionist
She's actually an N.T.P. Like me.
She is an N.T.P.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. I've run into met so many fantastic NTPs in the last, since I started this podcast and this year. And it's amazing. What a great educational platform for someone who doesn't want to go the mainstream route. If you want to get into nutrition, I definitely go with the NTA. Definitely not sponsored by Pepsi, ConAgra, or General Mills,
if you love this kind of stuff, you will find a whole tribe of people that really do, either think that way, or they're so open to learning. And that's the beauty of it, is that they also encourage discourse, which is great. You want to be able to present alternative arguments. And I can't say enough about my time there. And and her farm is actually in my home state of Massachusetts as well. So I have a lot of connections to Diane. Yeah, she does amazing work, and that's really the only way that I know of to actually help improve the environment as well. So I often tell people I'm not an advocate for factory farming. I think those are just as bad as some of the other processed foods in terms of animal welfare and
right.
Possibly the nutrient value of those animals. So I mean, when I of course, you get people who want to simplify your argument to, so you're just saying you can just go to McDonald's and eat the burger and you'll be fine. And that's a gross oversimplification. There's just too much nuance. That's not what I'm advocating for.
Not at all.
But clearly that's a person who has an agenda and they just want to reach out and attack somebody. And I often say, you really have to read what I write. I write long form, or as long a form as I can on Instagram. There's a character limit, so I write as long form as I can, but it's really hard to get a point across. I always end up running out of space.
It's a soundbite. We have a soundbite mentality, and we want everything wrapped up in a headline or a quick soundbite or a 30-second blurb. And things are not that simple. I'm sorry. No. If you want it that simple, expect the results to be maybe not so beneficial, or what you end up, your conclusions to be not so complete. Right. If you can't take more than 30 seconds to dive in and understand a topic, or you're just looking for a headline and go. I mean, I understand everybody's busy, but it's like, we have to take on something that's your health. You're talking about prevention. If you're going to start knocking other people, if you're going to start trolling or hitting people up with contradictory messages, you need to know you might want to dig in a little bit and get some depth to what you're talking about, because it's not all meat isn't all about just factory farms and McDonald's. It's not even close to that. And so you look at carnivores in the community, who are, whether they're MDs or nutritionists or they're just athletes. So that's one extreme where you think all they eat is meat. So they are, but if you want to look at their blood work, there are some healthy humans, very healthy humans. Their insulin levels are going to be low. Their triglyceride levels are going to be low. Their cholesterol levels might be higher, but is it really a bad thing in that insulin sensitive environment?
Right. It's all about the ratios when it comes to cholesterol. And you're right. Bumper sticker logic is why so many ideas, I think, really penetrate the public consciousness, is that when something is extremely simple, no matter whether it's correct or not,
right? It's
simple, it sells. And I think that's why I appreciate things like your show and all long form conversations. I think this is the future of media. And that's the other, point of action is to help create your own media, or at least digest a different version of media. Listen to conversations like this, even if you don't agree with them, with all the points being made. There's nobody I agree with 100% of the time. And I like that,
right.
And I think that's, but there's always mutual respect. I mean, I had somebody with that study that I pointed to the other day said, meat shortens telomeres. And I said, he was a DM, and I very respectfully said, I haven't read that research, but that's not what I'm talking about here. This was in relation to meat and heart disease. But I actually have studies that show red meat actually increases telomeres. Yeah. So there's conflicting research. And I said, do you have, please present me with something. And of course, the comeback was, you call yourself a professional and you haven't read the study. And I'm like, well, I can't read every study ever. I mean, I'm saying present your study. And, he said, well, go Google it. And I said, okay, so see, you wouldn't have passed my very first evidence-based medicine class when you have to make an argument and then support it yourself. You can't tell the person, I'm making this argument, go find the research yourself. That's somebody who's never studied science, who doesn't understand, who has an agenda. And I don't really engage with that kind of thing, because quite honestly, my time is too valuable. And there are other people that want, but it's that, unfortunately, that kind of, I could smell the agenda from a mile away. And I said, listen, if you have a study, I would love to read it again, because I really try to be open and honest. But when you attack somebody right off the bat without really reading what they've written, it's tough. But that's the world we live in. Like you said, the soundbite world, everything wants to be, very, very simple and quick. And it's tough. It's
not always so complete.
Right. Right.
But it works in the echo chamber, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. I want people to find you. So I know you're very active on Instagram. Your handle is Perpetual Health Co., correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. And then I know you're on Parler as well, Perpetual Health Same, right?
Yep,
Perpetual
same
Health
one.
Co.
Yep.
Okay. CO.
CO. Yep.
Perpetual Health CO. So that's the best. I hope you do get a YouTube channel up. I know we talked about that briefly. I mean, I'd love to, that's how I love consuming a lot of information from people, because I can put it on in the car while I'm going from client to client and just listen and take it in. So
That
if
is,
you get
yeah,
that
that is the
going.
plan. And I totally agree with you. I think that's one of the best ways to consume media whenever you have free time, is just to listen or to watch or to have on in the background. It's, you can absorb information through osmosis that way. And it's amazing some of the things you pick up.
Yeah. And it lets you like, okay, I want to dig deeper on that. I want to dive deep. It gives you something to dive into. So it's definitely ways I've personally heard something I hadn't heard before, something in conflict. I'm like, okay, I need to dig a little deeper because there's a nugget here and there.
Right.
And that's how that's part of the grassroots movement, is how we share information and how we create the community that isn't about always agreeing on everything, like
Right.
you said, but it's at least like, let's get a general pathway where we can tell people, hey, that way is kind of dangerous. This way, find what works for you with these kind of guidelines, or give this a try in this paradigm that works best for you. And see how it works for you.
Yeah.
See how it works for you. So do you mind taking a few extra minutes just to give some people just maybe some action steps if they're kind of like feeling like they're insulin resistant, they have blood sugar issues, weight control. What are some general guidelines that you kind of like baby steps to start that you give people?
I mean, it sounds cliche, but I think honestly, starting with like as whole of a food approach as you can, and start by preparing as much as you can of your own meal. In other words, instead of going out to a restaurant, or instead of buying things in a prepackaged form, because usually those are full of added ingredients, added sugars, things that you really don't need. So it can be as simple as buying a pound of grass-fed ground beef and some vegetables, your favorite vegetables, and just simply throwing them in a skillet and sauteing them. And you can make a whole bunch, and you can use them as leftovers. You can have them for the next day. So that's just a really simple thing. I mean, you don't have to be able to cook to be able to throw some meat on a pan and stir fry vegetables. Like that really doesn't take very much at all. So that's sort of one approach. I think it's important maybe to get a baseline for blood work. So find a practitioner, go to a doctor, just to see where you're at, because if you start to institute changes, you want to see those things move in a positive or negative direction. Maybe you've exceeded your carbohydrate threshold, your tolerance for carbohydrates. And so maybe in that case, you might want to consider a lower carbohydrate strategy if you're pre-type 2 diabetic, or if you're diabetic. So those are the things. I think I really take a bio-individual approach. But I think the number one thing is to again, start with as much local food as you can and as much whole food as you can. And some people think that's really boring, but I think you'd be surprised at how much your tastes will respond to real, whole, fresh food. And the more you pull yourself away from the processed foods, I'm blown away by how things all of a sudden start to taste different to people. If you wean yourself off of the sweet, all of a sudden you start to find sweet in places that you wouldn't have necessarily thought of it before. So that's really an interesting thing for people. Even something as simple as ketchup. Most commercial ketchup has sugar added to it.
Oh yeah.
But when you start to, and peanut butter is another one, a lot of sugar added to it. But once you start to consume natural foods, all of a sudden people will tell me, I bought whole natural almond butter or whole natural peanut butter with no sugar added, and I still think it's sweet. But I never would have thought that before. Or now I consume dark chocolate, 70, 80, 90% dark chocolate. And it's like a treat for me. Whereas before I needed the sweet milk chocolate, because it's like you get desensitized to, for a while. I would say maybe understanding your intermittent fasting. So I know we didn't really touch on that much, but understanding that humans are designed for feast and famine. And so maybe just condensing your eating window a little bit, even just starting with a simple 12-12. So maybe your last meal is at 8 o'clock at night, and your first meal would be not till 8 o'clock in the morning. So you're at least giving your body 12 hours off of food to start some of the reparative processes and allow digestion. Every 2 to 3 days, your gut lining tends to regenerate. And so you want to give your gut a chance to sort of do some cleanup work that it never gets to do in the fed state. So, just those few things. And that's not really that difficult to some people, although it may be foreign to think, you mean I shouldn't eat first thing, when I get up? And Not necessarily, not for some people, not if you're not hungry. You don't have to force breakfast down because you think it's the most important meal of the day.
Right.
It may be for you, but it's not for everybody.
Mm.
The sigh of relief for some clients is really funny
Oh, yeah.
when they're like, oh, I don't have to eat, I don't have to cram down a bagel at 6:30 because it's the most important meal of the day. I'm like, oh, good God, no, you don't.
Please don't.
And, and they're like, oh, okay, great. And they actually, because they're trapped in that echo chamber of,
Sure.
of perceived knowledge. So I think just a few of those little points, some fresh homemade foods, a little bit of time restricted feeding, and just starting to understand what level metabolic health you're at and what you're actually, what your goal is are a few steps you can take to really just start to, point the arrow in the right direction.
Okay, awesome. So that I would assume with your narrowing food window, you would also limit meal frequency. In other words, not grazing, but actually you said feast or famine. So like having a set meal versus a habit of like, oh, there's something in the drawer, there's something in the bag, there's something in the car.
Yeah, maybe step 3 would be remove all the knickknacks from your desk at work. And, because snacking is definitely not necessarily in accordance with human physiology. And really snacking is a relatively new thing. I mean, do you remember, even like 40, 50 years ago, mothers and fathers would tell their kids, don't snack, you're going to ruin your dinner. And now it's like, no, you need to snack to stoke your metabolism. So it's, it's clearly the message is a little convoluted, but I like to, if someone's going to eat 3 meals, I like to have it be 3 square meals. And if you need to snack, most likely your meal wasn't nutrient dense enough. It wasn't substantial enough. And so the next time think, okay, I'm going to make that meal a little bit more substantial so that I don't have the need to snack. And then that way in between meals, you have a little bit of intermittent fasting going on.
Sure.
So that's a good point. Yeah, I would say I do eventually try to get people to reduce snacking to next to nothing, if not nothing.
Gotcha. Awesome. Wow. That's exactly what I've been talking to people about as well. I mean, it's like right in line. That's with what I've been saying. So that's perfect. I mean, I'm glad we agree, I should say, because, in the master's program, and I've just kind of been kind of one of those guys that just kind of stumbles in and doing my own thing for a number of years. But
that's where it started for me. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. You were a trainer as well.
Yeah. And I couldn't get the results that I wanted for my clients. And so I said, I should start studying this. And then I absolutely fell in love with it. So.
Right. Same happened to me. Well, great. Fantastic. Thank you, Jay, for your time here. I love everything you've shared, and I'll make sure in the show notes we'll link to your Instagram and your Parler account, and any of those studies that you mentioned, I can include those or link out to them. But for those listening who want to dig a little deeper and actually read through a study and see how those things can get buried in there, way below the headline that seems to have everything summed up so neatly.
It's an educational experience for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again. And I look forward to talking to you more on Instagram. It's been.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.